So I'd like to welcome everyone. I'm Kenny Sturgeon, Executive Director of the Wenatchee Valley Museum and Cultural Center. Welcome to our Valley, Our Future Q&A session with local community leaders. Our mission at the museum is to gather, engage, and educate our community. Our museum also serves as a community forum, a place where you can meet with your neighbors, learn about issues important to our community, and discuss your thoughts and opinions. We are enjoying the opportunity to gather virtually in forums like this until we can gather in person again. Our goal today is to provide our community with the opportunity to learn from local leaders about Our Valley, Our Future, Nuestro Valle, Nuestro Futuro. Sorry, Teresa, hope that was close. The community building initiative that arose in late 2014, and specifically to talk about the recent published report, Our Path Forward, from Our Valley, Our Future's One Community Working Group. Leading the conversation is Steve Maher, Our Valley, Our Future Project Coordinator. We're also joined by One Community Working Group members, Teresa Bendito, Community Organizer and co-founder of Parque Padrinos, Bob Bugert, Chelan County Commissioner, and Stacy Luckensmeyer, Wenatchee Valley College Business and Industry Liaison. I'll be on hand to moderate today's session. We encourage those of you who are live with us via Zoom or Facebook to join in the discussion. If you're on Facebook Live, feel free to leave a question in the comments. And if you're joining us via Zoom, you can ask questions in the Q&A or the chat. I'll monitor your questions and do my best to make sure that we get them answered. For now, I'd like to turn it over to Steve, Teresa, Bob, and Stacy. To start us off, Steve, can you tell us what is the Our Valley, Our Future initiative about? How was it started, its purpose, and some of its accomplishments? And then after that, I'd really love to hear from the others on why you each chose to get involved in Our Valley, Our Future.
Thank you, Kenny, and thank you everybody for this great opportunity today to give you more ideas about what Our Valley, Our Future has been doing, and in particular, the One Community Working Group and the report they came out with recently. Our Valley, Our Future started in late 2014, and it was a small group of community leaders, Stacy Luckensmeyer being one of them back then, and they were meeting, I wasn't involved back then, but basically for coffee, discussing regional issues, and they kind of looked around and saw all these huge issues that know no boundaries, and said, hey, we've got to come together, we've got to start working on these things as one region. And you know, those issues back then, and you know, some of these are still present today, but they included things like wildfires, employment. In late 2014, I think either Alcoa had shut down or was on the verge of shutting down. The community was talking about that. Employment, housing, transportation, cultural integration, all those issues are still with us today. So OVOF back then spent, it was 2015, 16, researching, reaching out to what ended up being thousands of residents to get their input on how to improve the quality of life here. They ended up taking that information, analyzing it, and then using that to mold what we call our action plan, which includes a lot of different projects and programs that either were not being done back then or not to the level that they needed to be. Went out and found lead partners and then published this action plan, which is essentially a community plan for the region. Since then, OVOF has been doing a lot of work helping with the implementations of some of these projects, including what we call game changer projects, and I know we'll be getting into that a little bit later. And also continuing to engage the community, our residents here, with outreach. You know, we've continued to do things like surveys. One in particular we did a couple of years ago was on housing. We also did one this past May where we got feedback from the community on COVID impacts that people were dealing with. And then also we've continued to publish reports that include really good data, like the one we're going to talk about today, which is Our Path Forward, Regional Thinking, Inclusion and Collaboration. The other thing I might want to add is 2019, OVOF became an official nonprofit organization. And our main goal, as it's always been, is to, you know, what it really comes down to is improve the quality of life for everybody here. That's really important across, you know, different focus areas. And we do that by convening, facilitating, collecting data, conducting research, planning, and communicating. And that's kind of what our main things are. And with that, I'll turn it over to the other three who are with us today.
Thanks. Any of
I'll
you?
jump in, I suppose. You know, as Steve mentioned, I've had the privilege of being part of our Valley Future from the very beginning, and it was a group of folks who work in economic development, and we would meet every month for what we called our informal economic development group and just compare notes. What are you working on? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing? And we realized that we were hearing and talking about the same things. And as we were all connecting with community, we were seeing a pattern. So we spent a little bit of time trying to come up with new ways that our entities could collaborate and work together on some things. And then after, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months of conversations like that, it was Lisa Parks, who was the executive director for the Port of Douglas. She said, you know, we're spending a lot of time talking about what the community wants. Maybe we better ask the community and really get either confirmation or possibly some mind-blowing perspective for us. And that really put us down the path to, you know, where we are today. And it's been kind of one of those gift of a lifetime projects to work on. And it's been fascinating and challenging and just really an honor to be a part of it.
Bob or Teresa, either of you like to share?
Would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, thank you again for the opportunity for being here virtually. My experience is a little bit different. My first encounter with actually Our Valley, Our Future was a couple years back when there were roundtable conversations happening with the community members around specific issues that led to this Game Changers. My first conversation with folks involved with the Our Valley, Our Future organization was around housing. And at this meeting, my mother and I were a part of that conversation and got to share, you know, the different experiences that we have had around housing and the different, you know, issues that our community members face, and specifically, you know, looking forward into the future and really reflecting back on our own experience. How can we learn and improve on creating different housing opportunities for all of our community members? And so that was, I remember my very first experience, you know, being in a room with different elected officials and being able to share my story and sharing it in a way that said, you know, we have to do something about this as well, because it's affecting all of us. And after that experience, I began to be more in communication with a couple of the other leaders and board members of the organization. And then it led to an invitation from Our Valley, Our Future to be a part of the One Community Working Group that we'll be talking about later today.
Thank you.
My experiences are somewhat similar to Teresa's. I did participate in some of those roundtable discussions, and I found them to be very revealing about the commitment of our community to work on issues together and to really come up with some very positive and creative approaches to dealing with some of the challenges that our community faces. And so some of the things like the Tech Sector Hub, and as Teresa mentioned, the Housing Solutions Work Group, are just remarkable products that have really guided us a lot. All these game changers have already made some significant advances for our community. That's really great to see. But the one game changer that really stuck out to me right from the get-go was the regional thinking concept here that really spoke to me a lot. And a lot of it is because I guess maybe I'm a typical resident of this economy here, that we really are a regional economy. I live within unincorporated Chelan County. I do a lot of my business right here. I work within the city limits, Wenatchee city limits. I do a lot of my shopping, grocery shopping over in city of East Wenatchee. And I do some of my shopping as well over in unincorporated Douglas County. So there are all these different jurisdictions here, all these different models here that are underway, but it's all one economy. And what I have really seen now as an elected official, and I've always thought that way, is that it is so vitally important, Kenny, for us jurisdictions to be able to work together for a common good. There are just inherent obstacles to that as far as our ability to work together, and each jurisdiction, regrettably, is just forced into a mindset of what's good for us, for my particular jurisdiction. And for us to be able to get out of that mold, to create some new incentives so that we all can benefit each other, is really important for an economy as a whole, if we are really to address some of our long-term needs. And it provides a greater benefit, much greater benefit to our taxpayers, provides tremendous efficiencies, and just a better long-range plan. So once I heard of the one community game changer, I really thought that this was so very important.
Thanks, Bob, and I agree. Steve, it seems like a good opportunity if you could tell us what does Our Valley Our Future mean by a game changer, and then what specifically is the one community game changer?
Yeah, we defined a game changer project or program as one that will move the needle significantly in the community, like big time. And we have 7 in our initial action plan. The one community one is an interesting one because it kind of, from a big picture standpoint, it kind of hits along a lot of the key points and goals of Our Valley Our Future. The original wording to that, which is still in there, talked about building on increased cooperation between the government jurisdictions here, and also asking them to, see if they can leverage their resources greater so that there was, more coverage and better services. It also talked about what we called back then a white paper or a report that further explored the opportunities and challenges associated with that. So the history of this thing is back in 2017, when we released that first action plan, 7 game changers, the Our Valley Our Future board decided to kind of wait on this one and let it percolate a little bit as the other game changers got going. And in hindsight, that was a really, really smart move, because those other game changers that did get going, that had movement, were basically regional in thinking. The scope of those was regional thinking as well. And so I'm thinking of things like the Tech Hub, Housing, TREAD, which is the Regional Trails Organization. All those had kind of a regional component to them. And so by allowing those to get going and to see how those took off, basically created that momentum, and it also created the foundation then for the one community to get going. And I went back and looked at my notes this morning. It was back in April of 2019 when Bob Bugert came to us and said, hey, this game changer really resonates with me. What's the status of it? And so the timing was perfect. The board at that point was ready to get going on the one game changer, the one community game changer. And so about a month later, that first meeting took place of the working group. It was Bob, Rufus Woods, I believe Stacy was involved in coming up with a slate of folks who could serve on that working group. And we wanted this to be truly a blue ribbon group that was diverse, but also had some, I don't know what the right word is, maybe heavy hitters is a good word for it. People who had some really good influence in the community already, because we knew this was going to be, a lot of this was going to be talking about one community, regional thinking, why that was important. Yeah, May 13th, 2019 was their first meeting. They ended up meeting about a dozen times over the next 9 months, researching the issue further, coming up with past examples of regional thinking, and and basically putting things down on paper. One of the great things I think they did is they broadened the description of one community, and so that it included more than just governmental jurisdictions, nonprofits, basically everybody. And they also backed away from recommending anything like mergers or consolidations. The thinking being that, yeah, a merger might happen down the road, similar to what happened, a few years ago with the Wenatchee Fire Department and the Chelan County Fire District 1. But that was more of a how, and they didn't want to get into that. And I think it was a really smart move for a lot of different reasons, but to keep the focus on regional thinking and inclusion and collaboration. And again, they concluded, as you'll see in the report, that approach is more important than ever now. There's a lot of big changes happening in our community, a lot of driven by population growth and the need for more infrastructure and things, again, that know no boundaries. And so to their credit, that's the path they headed down.
Thanks, Steve. I always forget when I'm on mute, because it happens, you know. I'm actually wondering if I could ask each of you, I know that the report that came out this late summer did focus on those 3 areas that Steve mentioned. So on regional thinking, on inclusion, and on collaboration. And I'm gonna ask each of you, Bob, Teresa, and Stacy, to take a piece of that and just tell us a little bit about what that area kind of encompasses, and why it's important under this Our Path Forward. And I'm actually going to start with Stacy. I'm going to kind of go backwards from how I had told you all. And Stacy, if you could chat a little bit about collaboration, I think that would be great.
Yes. It does go back to the origin story of Our Valley, Our Future. How can we best work together and maximize impact and really make a difference with the resources and the time and everything that each of us have? And we have seen historically, there's an awful lot of that has happened. But like Bob said, a jurisdiction, boundaries are defined. And then, over time, really that training and the perspective is honed in on that. And we only have so much time in the day. Collaboration takes more time. So it tends to be an easy thing to put to the side. And when you want to kind of see what the perspective is from one city to another, you end up realizing that some of you have the same, you're in the same boat. Sometimes you see a solution from a potential partner that you hadn't thought of yet, or that they've tested out. There's a lot to be learned and gained from initially just having those conversations. And the more we talk with one another, the more we compare notes, the more we learn. And, we can pull info from people outside of our community too and bring back. So before you can really look at how we collaborate together and what we do, we just have to be in communication with one another. And I think over the last 6+ years that we've been working on the Our Valley, Our Future project, that communication piece has changed and grown so much across our region. With the one community work, that's where all the recommendations in the plan or the ideas in this report really need to start. Let's have some conversations about all of these points. And the document that has been created that Steve has distributed out, there's a lot of points for conversation in there. So the hope in that is that no one reads those as a mandate to collaborate. It's not. These are potential opportunities where there's some real strength possibly, but it's really up to a lot of folks in our region to start discussing those items and seeking out other entities and other individuals who might be interested in that conversation too, and then carefully creating the ways that they can collaborate ultimately to make a whole lot more happen. I think of our ports. It's one of the examples that we've seen where both of those ports entities still exist, still have their own identities, still have their own commissioners and their own taxing base, right? But they have really brought their resources together and have leveraged that. And now they get to play in a much bigger pool and make a much bigger impact that benefits all of us that live here in the region. So we're on a pretty good path, I think, to seeing that continue to grow. We all, I know the college, our partnerships and collaborating with others is so important. The entire community has an effect on our students. Every aspect of life here in the region affects our students. And the work that we do, educating and upskilling the workforce, trickles out and affects every aspect of our region as well. So we need to be really mindful and intentional about finding ways to partner and collaborate together. We all win.
Thanks, Stacy. I couldn't agree with you more. I As many people know, I moved here in November 2018, and one of the things I was struck by is how truly collaborative the different nonprofits, different organizations, different people in government have been, just to want to do something that moves things forward, which is really impressive. It's not always the case. Teresa, I'm really hoping you would share a bit on your thoughts on the inclusion part of the report.
Yes, of course. So my experience actually joining this working group was very positive, and it was really interesting to be a part of conversations with people like Commissioner Bob Bugert and commissioners from Douglas County as well, and really leaders across the different sectors that are so important in our community. And when we talked about our vision for the One Community Working Group, the importance of collaboration and regional thinking, well, inclusion is just one part that it just basically is a part of, and it shouldn't just be talked about. It needs to be really be a part of the conversations and be seen really when we're talking about collaboration and regional thinking. The different voices that come together to talk about these other issues, that's what's going to make things work much better, and not just for a certain set of people, but for everyone, right? And so when in the conversations of the One Community Working Group, we spoke a lot about how the demographics in our valley are changing rapidly. And that just provides really great opportunities to continue to bridge across cultures, across ages, across all types of demographics, to ensure that everyone in our community really is able to feel proud of calling this place home. And so, in bringing different voices and people into work plans, into roundtable discussions, it provides better ways of thinking, and we really committed ourselves to tapping into the energy and the ideas of people from across the different sectors. And one of the ways we did that was actually, as we were discussing the different issues that we were seeing in the community, and other potential solutions to it, we said, well, we need to cast a wider net, and we need to do this conversation. We'll invite more leaders across other industries so that they can share what they are seeing, talk about their experiences. But then we also said, and we really need one that is focused on our young professionals and students. And so that was one thing that we focused on. We held two different discussions where we included in one of them a focus of young professionals. We had high school students, college students, and young professionals that were born and raised in Wenatchee, left to go pursue higher education and came back, others that had just moved to Wenatchee. So all of those different experiences of living at some point in this area really helped us understand issues at a different level, and understand the complexities of each one, but also the abundance of opportunities that each one brought as well, and how we can ensure that that we are respectful, that we are inviting for all people, and that people will continue to want to be a part of this community here. And so as we did a lot of our work in the One Community Working Group, we also reached out to other members of the community to just provide some feedback. And one of the people who replied back, they mentioned that the goal of inclusion shouldn't be to replace someone at the table, but rather make it bigger so that we can really understand what different people in our communities are facing. And so that is part of the reason why I continue to stay a part of these conversations, but also to learn from a lot of our representatives who have a lot of experience, and ensure that, you know, as we talk about our region in the next, what it's going to look like in the next 50 years, that we are also training and we're giving space to the young leaders as well to be able to learn, because at one point we're going to be the ones in a lot of these positions, and we're going to need to have the experience, and we're going to need to learn. We need those opportunities. And so when we talk about inclusion, we just really believe that everyone should have the opportunity to be a part of all of the solutions, and we need to really hear from our communities, and not just the same couple folks all the time, but we really need to do better to reach across all of the different sectors. And with these collaborative discussions, that's just how we build and connect and refrain from being transactional, but we really grow as a community and grow relationships.
I think that's fantastic, Teresa. Thank you. And what's interesting, I'm going to ask Bob to talk about the regional thinking side, but as you talk, and I'm sure I'll hear this from Bob too, you can hear how they're all interconnected into that one game changer, which is just so clear. And Bob, one of the reasons I asked if you would talk about regional thinking is, you know, you are a county commissioner, fairly regional, but also your role in Chelan Douglas Land Trust prior to that. And you can't do that just from Chelan's point of view or just from Douglas County's point of view. So if you could talk a little bit about that particular aspect of the report, that would be great.
Yeah, I would be honored to, Kenny. And I feel really lucky the fact that I came on third here, that both Stacy and Teresa spoke before me, because they laid such a great foundation. And truly it is. It's a collaboration and inclusion that is really going to make this whole process so successful. And so one of the things we saw, Kenny, right off the bat, is that there is a tremendous amount of change that is occurring to our valley right at this time. And we know that there's a tremendous amount of change that will be coming as well. And really to work together as a community, as a partnership here, really is so very important, that we are able to address some of the good things and perhaps some not so good things that will be coming to our valley, and really to be able to address that and be proactive and to work together in an inclusive and collaborative way. So I kind of briefly mentioned, you know, some of the challenges that local governments face, you know, working at a regional level. And but one thing we clearly know is that our population here is going to grow considerably. You know, right now, the Washington state population is 7.5 million, something like that. And all projections are that the state's population is going to grow by perhaps another 2 million within the next 20 years or so. A fairly rapid increase. And those of us that were in this working group, we had no clear data to back it up, but it was our opinion to believe that a very large proportion of those incoming folks will be coming to North Central Washington, to our community. And why wouldn't they? You know, that we've got clear skies, tremendous amenities, fast fiber, relatively low traffic, at least at this time, and just abundance of outdoor recreation and arts and all kinds of amenities that make it very appealing. And haven't we just seen this now with some of the response related to the COVID pandemic, that people are coming here because of the quality of life? It's quieter, it's easier, it's more family-centric. It really does allow for some of those things that really do appeal to people. So with that though, we need to plan. We need to plan accordingly. And that again takes a lot of collaboration and inclusion. Such things as issues such as housing, our education needs, employment, healthcare, cultural integration, population growth, and the infrastructure demands that all of these place. They know no boundaries. And so it is a part of a rapidly changing landscape that we as a full community need to be proactive about. And so this gives us this foundation that has been created through this one community process, really provides a great um, avenue for us to be able to enhance and strengthen our dialogue as not just as public entities, but private businesses, nonprofits, sector-based groups, all players to be able to work together and to come up with our preferred future. And I think this is a great opportunity for that.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, even brought home more since the pandemic started and the lockdown, and more businesses are understanding that you don't necessarily need your workforce in a cubicle office all next to each other, which is going to create a lot more freedom for people who may not have been able to be outside of a major metropolitan area to think about what's really important to them and where they want to be. And this is a beautiful place to be. So I predict even more rapid changes because of that. So yeah, thank you.
It's an opportunity for us.
It is, definitely. I'd love to hear from each of you, Steve included. I know you all were involved in a pretty lengthy process, but lengthy yet quick, if that makes any sense. It seemed like there were a lot of pieces to it and a lot of things you did, but in a fairly compact amount of time. So Steve, I'd love if you could just talk a little bit about the process that went into this report. And then I'd love to hear from each of you, what one thing throughout this process surprised you? What did you at one point think, well, I never thought of that before. Whoa, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so the working group met about a dozen times between May 2019 and I want to say like February or so of 2020. The process was they were doing a lot of research. First of all, they brought a wealth of information and their own knowledge, institutional knowledge about things here. We did some things right away. Remember the first thing we did, we dove into kind of getting a sense of how much regional thinking had occurred in the past through either organizations or projects, et cetera, and came up with a pretty lengthy list. It was really fascinating and actually pretty heartwarming to see things have been done on a regional basis here for several decades. I think the first example we found, the first real concrete example was the library system, the regional library system being formed here. If I remember right, it was like 1959 or maybe 1960. So it goes back quite a ways. And then things started happening after that. You know, I think you could consider even Mission Ridge, the creation of Mission Ridge as being a regional thing, because the folks who worked on that were not just from Wenatchee, they were from all over the region. But then other things like formation of the regional water system, which I think was a fascinating example. That was the city of Wenatchee and the Chelan County PUD back in the early 1970s. They realized that the water treatment plant down at the foot of Fifth Street, which is no longer there, was not going to work much longer. And so they actually came together, formed their own regional water system, and started putting things in place. 5-10 years later, the East Wenatchee Water District joined that. So again, that was a real regional effort. And so that was the first thing we did, because the group knew of these things, but wanted something on paper to be able to really look and see, and also kind of see how things accelerated. And once we got, I think, into the 1980s, there was more regional organizations that were starting to form. They also did research, as Bob mentioned, about population growth, and Bob is right about that. The State Office of Financial Management has estimated there's going to be 2 million new residents in Washington State over the next 20 years. And I think like 1.6 million of that 2 million figure is going to become from in-migration. So those are people moving to Washington State. And the State Office of Financial Management is expecting that most of those folks will be either retirees who are very mobile today, who can kind of go anywhere that they want, and are looking for quality of life kind of places, as well as the millennials who again can move around and do things. They have a different value system maybe than some other generations, and they're interested in quality of life. They want to live a good life. They want to have things close to them, recreational things, arts and culture, et cetera. And then since COVID has happened, we've seen that happening, with remote workers heading off and living in other places. So they did all that kind of work. The process was interesting because I was the one taking notes and writing stuff down. And so we would come out of these meetings, and between that meeting and the next meeting, I would put stuff down on paper, and then the working group would look that stuff, check it out, review it, and then either make changes or add things or subtract or whatever. And that was the kind of process we used over those 12 meetings. And once we kind of got into that process, things went pretty well. I mean, there was really great, it was the ability to have a meeting and end that meeting accomplishing a bunch and being able to kick that ball down the field further. And so that was the kind of the process we worked on. Let's see, the other thing I'd like to mention about that process too was, the involvement was really good. It wasn't, sometimes you appoint working groups or committees and everybody's there for the first meeting and maybe the second meeting, and then things sort of drop off, but this group stayed together. And it was interesting too, because we had, as Teresa mentioned, we had some older folks who've been community leaders for a long time. And then we had newer folks like Teresa herself, Jesse Mendoza being two really good examples, Spencer Taylor, who's with the Eastmont School District. So we did bring in some, I guess what you could call kind of newer community leaders. And then the two big, we held two, I think we called them, I'm not sure what we called them, roundtables or panel discussions. And that first one, we had about 60 kind of established community leaders show up. And then the second one we held, as Teresa mentioned, was again about 50 or 60, and they were mostly younger folks who were younger community leaders or on the verge of becoming a leader. And so that was fascinating. It was also fascinating to compare the responses between those two groups. The second group was way more futuristic in terms of things they saw coming that we needed to adjust to or plan for. And the first group was more, they looked into the future, but not as far as that second group did.
Thanks, Steve. That's actually a really interesting observation. I know a number of the responses you got to specific questions are in the report, so it is an interesting comparison. So Stacy, Teresa, Bob, what one thing surprised you, or what was an aha moment you had from this process you went through?
The large group sessions that we had, the second one was, Teresa talked about it a bit, was with high school students and college students and community, raised in the community, gone to school, come back, young professionals. And I was blown away by the regional thinking at all of those ages in there naturally. And, once you create the space for them to share their ideas, they held nothing back. And it was so encouraging that they would want to engage, want to share, want to tell you really what they think. And their ideas are so good. So reasoned, the personal experience point that they take that's kind of starts the germ of an idea, and then bam, they've got a broad application to how it benefits a lot of different folks. And that was very good to see. I'm embarrassed to admit that I was surprised by that. But really happy to see that. And I'm looking forward to very much creating more and more opportunities to get those younger voices out there so that they do have that opportunity to speak. Every time Steve mentions the word leader, I think of a lot of the different folks we've involved in this, and what leader really is. It's somebody in the community who has contributed time and effort to working through a really big problem we've had. And so when you look at your youth and you want those folks to step up into leadership, you're really telling them, I want you to commit yourself to working on some really difficult things. And that can be a hard sell, but it's what makes our community, and it's what changes our future. And it's really important work. So it's exciting to see so many young people show up and really just dive right in to those discussions.
Thank you.
I can go ahead, Teresa, if you'd like. Yeah, well, the thing that really spoke to me Kenny, was Steve briefly mentioned it there, is that Steve did some really great work in doing an inventory of the regional partnerships that have either are now established, or if they are well underway as far as getting established. And it really is telling about the level of collaboration and inclusion to get these things going. And it was broken down then by whether or not these were actual just agreements by parties to proceed. And they've lasted through the years, very informal process, to something like Steve said, the North Central Regional Library, which is now it's formalized. And there's other ones that actually have now been put in state statute, like the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board. So it's this whole range of approaches here that all accomplish a shared objective. And there is no set template about how this stuff gets done. I think that was really telling to me. And just the depth and breadth of the regional collaboration that is already underway, and that we need to celebrate that. We need to recognize them. We need to thank our predecessors that have made these things available. And then conversely, we really need to really celebrate and thank the participation and engagement of our young emerging leaders, that they were indeed very involved in this process. The level of energy and enthusiasm in our community roundtable, where we did have the young leaders there, was just really telling. And one of the big things, two big things that I picked up out of that, one is that, they're the ones that are really there. We talk all about this, how to plan for the next 20, 30 years. They're the ones that really are going to be living it. So their involvement was so integral. It's so great to have them. But one of the big things that they really recognize is just a given, is that climate change is here. And so we need to deal with it. And we don't need to rely upon Paris agreements, or we don't need to rely upon national policy. There's things we can do here collectively in our community and all the communities across the United States, all the communities across the world, think of it that way, that can make a meaningful difference. And I really picked up a can-do attitude amongst those young leaders. And that was really inspirational to me.
Good.
And then, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing then too is that hopefully we can spend a little bit of time related to this, Kenny, is that really the recognition of the importance of equity and inclusion, and that one of the spin-off efforts now from the One Community Game Changer is the equity and inclusion work group. And perhaps later on we could discuss that.
Yes, hold that thought, because my next question after I hear from Teresa on what surprised her or interested her is what's next step. So yeah.
Yeah, so I was just going to actually start with one of Commissioner Bugert's last comments was that what really surprised me, or what stood out to me, was in the role that I helped support this group in putting together that roundtable discussion with the young professionals and high school students and college students, when reaching out to them to ask, if they would be interested in participating, and giving them the little spiel about what we were going to talk about, the little Cliff Notes version of it. It was very, very right up front. The very first thing that a lot of them mentioned, well, how are we going to talk about what our valley is going to look like, this region is going to look like in 30 years, 50 years? We may not even have the opportunity to live through that, because again, the number one thing that they would bring up from the very beginning was about how we're going to protect our environment, the world we live in, and ensuring that we will be able to have an earth, a habitable place that we can call home, that we love and care for. So I thought, for me, that was really, really different, because it was the number one thing that as I was inviting them, they would say, and it was like, well, then great, we need you to be a part of this. Bring that energy to the conversation. And it didn't necessarily surprise me as a whole that the level of engagement that there was. I think, like already a couple panelists mentioned, it just really takes creating that space and making an intentional invitation to folks to participate and to talk about things that we really care about and learn together about them. So I think that was something that really stood out to me. I'm very thankful for that ability to learn and to grow from a lot of these conversations. I was also very surprised to see just the amount of incredible nonprofit organizations and entities that already exist in our region. Steve put together along a wide range of list of the different organizations that do already exist, and even as someone who, for me, as someone who is bilingual, who's born and raised in the Valley, I still didn't recognize so many of them. And I think that it just went to show how giving and how caring our community already is, but we just need to work on a little bit on how we ensure that across all sectors of our community, we know about the different work that each entity does, and how, again, we can put together ways to really, like we've been mentioning, collaboratively work across the different regions and ensure that our work is also centered around equity and inclusion. And so it was a really great opportunity to see how that was all coming together.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that observation, and Stacy and Bob, yours as well. I would love to hear from any of you, but Teresa in particular, as well as Bob, because you already brought it up. What are the next steps coming out of this report? You know, so often you put all this work in, you do all these meetings, you publish the report, and then in theory, you do something with it. And a lot of times you put it on a shelf and then you move on to other things in your life. So I'd really love to know, because I know that it's not just sitting on a shelf, and I know it's not just going to get put away. So what are some of the next steps coming out of the work that you guys did? And I'd particularly like to hear from Teresa and Bob first, just because I'm familiar with the work that you're doing in part of this. So love to hear more about that.
Yes, I can go ahead and get started. So a couple months into the pandemic, a couple of the folks who were already a part of the One Community Working Group, I mean, it was a really great opportunity to build relationships among already a lot of those community members. We came together, and Commissioner Bugert, you were one of the first people to kind of come together and say, you know, we're seeing a lot of things across the country, the civic unrest of the murder of George Floyd. We're seeing incredible disparities amongst the COVID positive cases in the local Latinx community compared to others. And we were in this digital age too, right? This technology age where we're coming together in person was just not happening. And really, we said, you know, we got to work on something here locally to really address a lot of this, a lot of what we're seeing in our community, and thinking specifically about equity and inclusion. That was something that we had already identified as something vital to the betterment for our community, and how we can really move that part forward in a time that just had so many people, especially looking for others who were like-minded, who wanted to do something about what we were seeing. And so we came together, we invited our One Community group to come together again, but also really, like we mentioned, widened that invitation and invited other members of our community who are already working in a lot of these spaces to come together and talk about a lot of this and say, what are we going to do? And Commissioner Bugert, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how that all came to be.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Thank you, Teresa. So that was a great foundation for this, is that we really did see that there was an opportunity, a unique opportunity, both good in the fact that we did have this one community report that was going out to the community, and it did have some very engaging language about the importance of inclusion. And then unfortunately, there was some of the tragedies that occurred nationwide related to some racially led violence, and not just based upon race, but also upon other communities that are minority based. And so that we really wanted to become much more proactive about this and to try to come up with something that would really meet the needs of our community here, is coming up with solid, practical ideas as far as how to address equity, diversity, and inclusion, both in the public sector and in our day-to-day lives in the private world. And so we did have a great opportunity for some key players in our community to engage in this process. We've been meeting pretty steadily now. Steve, you gotta help me now. It's been a while since
I think the first meeting was mid to late June, and the meetings have been pretty much weekly since then.
yeah. And so it's been very well participated. We are looking at different options. Thanks to Steve's work, we were able to bring in the Washington State members of the Washington State Hispanic Affairs Council to speak to us about some of the constructs that they have and give us some kind of recommendations there. We did actually talk to past members of the city of Wenatchee's Diversity Council to actually get ideas from them about lessons learned from their work years back, so that we can really come up with an approach. And then interestingly, we had discussions with the mayors of Wenatchee and East Wenatchee, and there's a clear recognition of the need for this, as well as Chelan County. We have recognized it as a need. There is a need. But what's interesting in talking with them, that we all agreed that this needs to be done at a regional level. This really needs to be done looking at our entire valley as a community. And so we've been very fortunate in the fact that the Our Valley, Our Future Board of Directors agreed to provide some support by way of Steve's work to facilitate these meetings, to serve as a fiscal sponsor in the hope, in the eventuality that we will be receiving some funding through different private foundations for this. I know that the local governments are exploring ways that we can provide support for this as well. So it does have standing, it does have some stability, and is able to come up with an approach that will be able to provide meaningful recommendations and sometimes some advocacy for some initiatives or undertakings here that would advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. So
I might add real quick, Our Valley, Our Future sees what's happening with this equity and inclusion working group as being pretty similar to what happened with TREAD, the Regional Trails Organization. Our Valley, Our Future helped give birth to TREAD, but TREAD is now a nonprofit and is going down its own path, separated from Our Valley, Our Future, and we can see the potential for this group kind of following a similar path.
So that is the trajectory that we would like to see for this group here. It is difficult work. It is something that the group really recognizes there is a need for this, and to be able to have that kind of charter organizational construct that can really allow for the development of tangible and durable recommendations. So we're very hopeful.
Thank you, Bob. We are rapidly running out of time, as always happens. So I know there's a few more questions that we're not going to get to, but I do want to ask each of you, and I'd like to start with Stacy. In your best moment, in your best mind, where does the work from Our Valley, Our Future lead you and lead us?
Talk about a really big question, Kenny.
I like to wrap up with the small thing.
Yeah. In my best moment, in my best mind, Our Valley, Our Future leads us to be really proactive in creating our future. And you know that's not a platitude in any way. Change has come up repeatedly here. Change is inevitable. And one of my favorite sayings, change is either going to happen to us or it's going to happen through us. And we get to determine what life looks like here if we're actively reaching out for that and becoming the change that we want to see. That's my hope for Our Valley, Our Future.
Beautiful. Thank you. Teresa.
If can I have 1 minute here?
You may.
I have connectivity.
You may, for sure. Bob.
Yeah, I think there's so many opportunities that are in front of us, and it really is that we've got the framework through OVOF to be able to think creatively, I can say it, and collaboratively. And we can get some of these things done. It's very exciting. And so I am so thankful that we do have such a grassroots organization that really has got a lot of legs, a lot of credibility to give us this vehicle to work with. So I'm very thankful for that, Kenny.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, it all comes down to making this a better place for everybody, right? In the face of a lot of change happening, not only locally, but statewide, nationally, and around the world. A lot of things are going on that, you know, we have no control over. But if you can shape things to the best of your ability, and I think that's accomplished by hearing all voices. I think that's really, really important. And not just, you know, you hear all voices, I guess, when people vote because they're voting, right, in an election. But we need to hear from people like all the time, you know, consistently, even between elections, because things change and people's opinions change, and you got to really make sure that you are constantly taking the pulse of the community and reflecting that in what you do. And I think, as Bob mentioned, not trying to pat Our Valley, Our Future on the back here, but the fact that we have this vehicle in place right now in really trying times with COVID, as we come out of COVID and we're able to focus on long-term recovery, having a vehicle like Our Valley, Our Future in place is a huge advantage for this community. It's absolutely, you would not believe how many communities don't have what we have now. And so we're in a really good place because of that.
Great, thank you, Steve.
And I would just echo what the rest of the panelists have also mentioned already. Really focusing on a future and coming together in ways that we can all grow and learn from each other. And I think Our Valley, Our Future has done a great job of already, including all sectors of our community, and my commitment and where I will hope to see, you know, also some more progress is to continue to build on that and be able to reach even more people. You know, we have, as we've mentioned, a large community here that also speaks just maybe one language, and how we can continue to engage our Spanish speaking community members, continue to provide more more equitable solutions, that we really center voices of the people who are most impacted by decisions than in the policy and in the solutions that are created. So I think a lot of us here are very committed to that vision as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Teresa. I'd like to thank each of you for joining us today. For your work that you're doing on behalf of our community and for your time. You guys probably know this, but maybe you don't. The work that was done in Our Valley, Our Future is one of the deciding factors and why I agreed to take the job at the museum. I was just so impressed and wanted to be a part of a community that would put that kind of effort and continues to put this kind of effort into shaping its future and involving the whole community in that direction. So thank you all for your time. I also like to thank our attendees for and the thoughtful questions and for your input and for your participation today. This has been a difficult year for us as a community, and we are so appreciative to have this opportunity to come together to discuss this important topic. We have other events coming up at the museum, though not in person, because as many of you know, we were closed down as of today until the 14th of December, but we are still available online to you as much as we can be. We've got a chocolate tasting coming up with local business Yeti chocolates, a virtual family paint and sip, and fun holiday activities for you guys. I'd like to invite you all to visit our website at www.wenatcheevalleymuseum.org to learn more. Thank you all again for your time and participation today, and I am honored to be able to work with each of you in this process. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.